Howdy Gamerinos. Now, originally this video was going to be about how Death is the Night. And yes, I did backtrack on my Why Kara was the Night video, mainly because after it's been like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months since Deltarune Chapter 3 and 4 released, obviously my opinions have swayed, and I'm less 100% on Carol being a knight and more 50-50 on her being the knight. But besides that, this video in general is less why Des is the knight, and if Des is the knight, then how does that parallel between Asriel, and in general, how does Deltarune's story parallel Undertale? So, with all that said, let's begin. First off, I'm gonna assume you already know Asriel's story in Undertale, but as a quick recap, Asriel in Undertale, I guess also Deltarune, is the son of both Toriel and Asgore. Anyways, Asgore fucking dies. Okay. Give it a context. Basically, a human fell down to the underground, and then the Dreamers, that being, Asgore's last name, well, you know, Asriel and Asgore and Toriel's last name, Dreamers. Anyways, the Dreamers adopt, the child that fell down. As you know, everything was happy and wholesome and great for a little bit. Then suddenly the child poisoned themselves. So they asked Asriel to carry their body to the surface, to see the flowers in their village, and where, as you can imagine, a monster carrying a dead child. Well, just say it didn't really suit well with the humans, so I don't know, he got shot or something. But as he died and returned back to underground, piles of Asriel's dust went into the flowers, and eventually, years later, Alphys, as you know, did her thing and made Flowey. And as you know, Flowey couldn't feel anything because, he's a flower. He doesn't have a soul. And as you know, he did some pretty bad stuff. And, like, at the end of the Pacifist route, where we see him luring all the monsters at the barrier, stealing all their souls, and turning into Asriel Dreamer, where you fight him and then save him at the end, and then blah blah blah. Like, that's the basic, a quick speed run recap plot synopsis of the story of Undertale, or specifically what I like to call the tragedy of the Dreamer family. It's funny because Undertale, focus on that tragedy, while in Deltarune, I feel like Deltarune's story parallels that, where instead of focusing too much on the Dreamer family or the tragedy of the Dreamer family, because Asriel's alive, in Deltarune, we're focusing on what I like to call the tragedy of the Holiday family. So, with all that said and backstory covered, let's begin. So, in Deltarune, both the Dreamers and the Holidays in the past were really close, with them watching TV during the holidays. Haha, funny holiday. Until one day, Asgore decided to go, driving his car right after a beer, where he, accidentally hit a bump that was shaped like a deer. Obviously, that's a joke. But speaking of Asgore, cousin Undertale, the reason why Asgore and Toriel are, divorced is due to, Asgore finding the piles of Asriel's dust. And after, he found Asriel fucking dead, he announced that any human that would fall down to the underground would be killed and their souls would be used to break the barrier. And obviously, Toriel didn't like that, so she divorced his bitch ass. Damn. Now, I'm not sure that's an excuse to constantly be a bitch around Asgore, but like, I guess it's an excuse to a degree. Now, obviously, in Undertale, or right, Deltarune, Asgore didn't kill a bunch of kids that we know of, but instead, he did something that caused Toriel to leave him. Now, what is that mysterious thing that caused Toriel to divorce his ass? I don't know. All we know is that it's something bad and that may or not involve death in some way. But judging by the context we have, it seems that Asgore didn't actually do something bad, and it's more of a scenario that Asgore witnessed something that people, especially his wife, did not believe him, basically being framed in a way, but not really, I think. Now, it could be something like, I don't know, like death falling into a dark world or getting corrupted or something. Anyhow, death, death's disappearance, if the theory is correct, that would be the main reason why he was kicked out of being police captain and, signing those divorce papers, where he eventually, after divorce, opened his flower shop, which honestly is a better fit for him. Now, unlike in Undertale, he's not really like an authority figure in Deltarune because, as you know, he runs a flower shop. But the person that does take the authority figure or leader in Deltarune is none other than Carol Holiday, the mother of both Des and Noelle Holiday. And similar to the Dreamers in Undertale, Carol has lost one of her own. Now, where it's kind of funny, the obvious differences between the Dreamers and the Holidays in Undertale Deltarune is that Carol only lost one child, unlike in Undertale where both Toro and Asgore lost both of their children. Damn, that's kind of funny in a twist away. But now, just from that, you can see the obvious parallels of Carol taking the place of Asgore of being, the leader of the monsters, or at least the leader of the monsters in a small town, and both of them losing children. Now, in Undertale, Flowey slash Asriel was the main villain of that game, with him being very powerful and him acting completely different from when he was still alive, mainly due to him lacking a soul, which could parallel Tessa's situation, which, first of all, obviously we don't know what happened to Tess at all. But if you're someone who likes digging through the code, there is some interesting unused text that is heavily speculated to be Des trapped in what is called the depths, which is the same area that you made your vessel all the way back in chapter 1, before it gets discarded, because as you know, your choices do not matter. And the depths described by Des is somewhere pitch black where you can't tell how long it's been, and that in the depths you don't eat, you don't drink, and you can't tell if you're awake or dreaming, dead or alive. And if this is where Des has really been all this time, I'm guessing over time, with her being in the depths for so long, she slowly either transformed or something corrupted her or something or some bullshit like that, causing her to turn or her body being piloted or whatever, turning her into the night. With all of that said, we can finally talk about the knight's behavior and how it contrasts Flowey's behavior. Now, for starters, they both similarly start with both of them attacking you. And in a way, both of them being a unbeatable fight, with the Undertale with having to save you, while in Deltarune, you're the one saving Toriel. Which since Toriel's in there to protect you, you lose that battle. Which, damn, by that logic, does that mean that Toriel can possibly beat the knight? I smell a fraud! You know what? Maybe that's the reason why the knight was trying to kidnap Toriel. Anyways, besides that nice parallel, I don't see a lot of people talk about the knight and Flowey's facial features and how, in Undertale, Flowey has a shit, and when I mean a shit, I mean a shit ton of fucking face sprites. with him constantly emoting from goofy off faces to more sinister faces. And not to mention, with him also creepily mimicking the faces of both Torio, Asgore, and even himself when he was alive. Now, obviously, that we know of, the knight doesn't do that, and also have to mention, the knight doesn't really have any face sprites, mainly due to the knight not having a single dialogue sprite or dialogue to begin with, unless you count that voice on the phone from chapter 4 to be the knight talking to Chris, but we don't know that for sure. But it makes up with the lack of dialogue sprites up for, well, an actual sprite, that being the actual knight sprite. And with the actual knight sprite, the knight doesn't just have a cheeky smile. In fact, its mouth can, well, obviously form to look like it's laughing because, it's a mouth. But it could also look like it's forming something that looks like an eye, just staring at you, while also moving around from right to left. And just from that, the knight clearly has some similar ways of expressing itself, and at least I hope in the future, it, in future chapters, the knight has more ways of expressing itself, and maybe mimicking the faces of the Holiday family, similar how Flowey mimicked the faces of his family, the Jimmer family. Oh, I also almost forgot to mention, but both Flowey and the Knight have a, or should I say, do the funny evil laugh. With an interesting thing about the Knight's laugh that is actually the same laugh as image underscore friend. That is very, very, very interesting how similar that is. Very interesting indeed. And not to mention, the knight actually has a personality, with the knight being pretty cheeky. And also not to mention, just look at this fucker just aura farming. Aura farming while Susie's chasing it. you know. Well, the knight's aura farming kind of looks similar to Chris when they're aura farming. Huh. I wonder if that's important. Probably not. Anyways, what else could I talk about? Oh shit, I almost forgot. Besides the Knight's theme obviously being a remix of Nightmare Night, the beginning portion and in general the whole song sounds strangely similar to Burn in Despair. Here's a comparison. When your boyfriend shares the same leitmotif as you. Dester was pretty peak. And unironically, it's just newsy for murder drones, with there being I'm assuming that this is like a goth slash emo chick. Well, um Asriel obviously being, a golden retriever type of guy, just being a good boy. But besides that, they also parallel each other's by their final attack, with their final attack being very similar to each other's, with them shooting out a bunch of projectiles that goes towards them, and also sharing a connection with their respected human. Well, at least in the genocide route, with Flowey thinking you're Kara, and then, the normal route, Des having a somewhat of a connection with Chris, with, them being both musicians, and in general, Des, occasionally beating the shit out of, or, okay, not beating the shit, occasionally giving Chris a bit of a smack after, I bet the 1,000 pranks that, Chris has done to Noel. And that's realistically all I could think of. Now, I'm sure there's more connections or more connections that will be done, slash parallels will be done in the, chapter 5, 6, and 7, haha, 6, 7. But you have to wait for that. But luckily, thanks to Tobias Fox's newest winter newsletter, seems that chapter 5 is definitely coming out next year. Hell yeah. Probably around the later half of 2025. And yeah, sorry this video wasn't really theory based ish at the end. I mean, I could come up with a theory. My best is that, well, obviously, we're definitely gonna have to save Des or whoever the fuck is the knight. Save them. Just like, hey, everything's gonna be okay. Everything is great, and you're loved and shit, and blah blah blah, or some bullshit like that. Uh, yeah, which and of course, will be a tragedy, or or just a super emotional moment. Not to mention being more emotional would probably if Des is night with Noelle eventually finding out, and then with her reuniting with her sister and stuff. Y'all see, be sweet and wholesome, and like, and, everybody will cry and shit. I know I will. Okay, maybe not. Nah, I would get somewhat emotional. Until that, get the Undertale ending. Well, that shit is peak, man. And honestly, I feel like in general, I feel like the holiday family or the tragedy of the holidays. I'm not sure I would say it would be better than the tragedy of the Dreamers, cause like that thing is just peak writing. And not to mention, I feel like it's slightly better with the more fantastical stuff. I think Deltarune doesn't have Deltarune has a lot of fantastical stuff, but obviously it doesn't have a thing where Asgard is killing children to break the barrier type shit. But it seems the roaring or something like that. It's similar barrier-ish. And not to mention, just like Undertale, where you need 7 souls to destroy the barrier. Maybe the 90s to make 7 completely different dark fountains, or just 7 dark fountains need to be formed in order to start the roaring or something like that. I think. I'm not sure exactly. I'm not a theorist to a degree. And in general, this is more just my general theories of what the story is going. Honestly, I probably just watch some, regular theorists apart from Spooky Dude and shit, and be like, yeah, I guess that's gonna happen, could not happen. But anyhow, I'm still really excited for chapter 5 and see where the story goes. And in general, see if the tragedy of the holidays can rival the tragedy of the Dreamers, which I doubt it, but all I know is that it will be really, really good. Because I trust in Toby Fox. And also, Merry Christmas, everybody, because I am planning on releasing this video on Christmas, because, funny December, December, 1225, haha, shelter code bullshit. December's birthday or whatever, Christmas. Yeah, I know. You get the joke, but basically, honestly, I thought it's the best time to release a video about deaths, but yeah, enough of me rambling. Hope you someone enjoyed this little video just talking about deaths in the night and how the story would go, and yeah. But wait, hold on, before you go. Well, first of all, I was actually meant to end this video just right now, but until I remembered something very important about Undertale, and one important thing that Flowey says Undertale is the quote, "It's kill or be killed," which is pretty much the main theme of Undertale. Like, would you rather kill the entire underground or let the under let the entire underground kill you or something like that, Like first of all, like I bet someone better than me obviously made like a video about the importance of it's kill or be killed. But yeah, but one thing there's something I noticed in Undertale, And not to mention Deltarune has a similar, but not really, at least, but the same concept there's of a quote meaning being very important. That being your choices do not matter. Now, obviously, that's kind of bullshit. Within the weird route and the hopes or Susie with the pen of hope and stuff. Writing our own story and stuff. But like, I feel like that quote just like it's kill or be killed has significance, obvious significance towards Deltarune. I mean, because it seems that, and the popular theory is, honestly, probably going to be true that no matter what you do, even if you go the other path, I mean, the weird route, you will always end up in your same fate. Or is it? Because I see one biggest thing about chapter 4 is defining fate and writing your own story. And perhaps by that logic, then that means, well, like we won't get a tragic ending or something like that. Because like just because our choices don't matter doesn't mean it obviously doesn't affect the people. And maybe if we save everybody, that will kind of disprove your choices do not matter, and that'll be like a whole talking point of Deltarune, or I guess the message of Deltarune, just like how the message of Undertale was, everybody's a bad guy or something, or like you can save them or something like that. Like I said, I'm not really professional when it comes to this type of shit, but like you get what I mean with the theming and messaging. But once again, to repeat this again, the theming of Undertale is kill or be killed, and simply you don't have to do that. And honestly, I just realized that was Flowey's ideology. Probably, well, first it was actually Susie's slash Gasser. But then, and then honestly, at this point, it's probably also Dess's ideology, where like your choices don't matter, and obviously we'll find a way to make our choices matter in the end. And that's really wanting to talk about the end. I just completely remember that in the theming and how this totally relates to Undertale's theming. But yeah, like that was actually it. So goodbye.